uniting those two and developing a positive self-concept. And this YouTube link, which you can see a little bit down here, that is a video of Roger's therapy, but we will watch that later. The humanists today are not very prominent in the field of like psychological research, but they've had a huge impact on counseling and education and on parenting. That idea of working towards self-actualization, determining what's the best career for you and so forth. But in terms of being scientific, it's seen as sort of vague and subjective, kind of like the Freudian projective tests. The last category that we're going to talk about here in terms of personality research is what's called the trait perspective, or the idea that the best way to understand people is to look at all these different distinguishing characteristics of their personality. So this dates back a long time, back to the 1930s. Allport and Odbert identified 18,000 words in the English language that represented traits. And then they subjected this to trait analysis. So what they were doing was they were trying to figure out how we can actually describe people using traits. Over time, personality inventories developed, which are questionnaires with a number of items designed to gauge what your traits are by asking you about your thoughts and feelings and behaviors in a wide variety of areas. So one of the things that you will do is you will do a free online Myers-Briggs, and that will identify your traits on one type of scale, and then you can get a sense of, does this actually describe you or not? This particular screen shows some descriptions of various types of ratings on the Myers-Briggs. So for example, if you were an ENFJ, that one is characterized as the teacher, and it says you have a gift with people, they love to be around you, you're bright and inspirational but also considerate and supportive, you like to be the center of attention. It goes on and gives a whole description. So after you have completed the Myers-Briggs, I would encourage you to look back at this table or look at a similar one to see the description and see whether you think that fits you or not. And they all do sound positive, but unlike fortunes and fortune cookies, if you read them closely, you'll notice that they are actually quite distinct. They're positive, but they're not all the same. So there's a couple other personality inventories. Cattell developed what's called factor analysis, which is a way of interpreting the personality surveys or personality tests and developing a map of people's personality traits. And he believed that you could take all those thousands of traits and boil them down to 16 core personality traits using statistical correlations. So we might find out that someone has excitement as a basic trait, and they might also have impatience and irritability as superficial related traits. So he boiled it down to 16 core traits, and then we get to the Eysenck's, Hans and Sybil Eysenck, and they simplified it much further and said, look, there's really only 2 dimensions. All of the traits and everything about our personalities can be analyzed using just these 2 dimensions: extroversion versus introversion, and emotional stability versus instability. So if you look at their little table down here, you can see these various combinations. If someone is extroverted and unstable, you would see these characteristics. They would be possibly aggressive, excitable, impulsive. Whereas if they're extroverted but stable, they would be social, they would have a lot of friends, they would be leaders. And then if you go to the introverted side, an unstable introvert is going to be someone who's rigid and anxious and reserved, somebody who doesn't leave their house, who doesn't want to make friends, who kind of lives inside their own head. Whereas a stable introvert would be somebody who's very calm, they're very reliable, somebody who might be a very good friend, somebody very thoughtful. So they said basically everything can be boiled down to these essentially 2 dimensions. Are you introverted or extroverted? Are you stable or unstable? I'm going to come back to the MMPI. Today's trait researchers believe that the personality dimensions the Eysenck's came up with are a little too narrow, but the 16 are too large, so they came up with this 5 factors of traits, and these are referred to as the Big 5. It's easy to remember them with the acronym CANOE. You can see C for conscientiousness, A for agreeableness, N for neuroticism, O for openness, and E for extroversion. So the Big 5 you can look at on this table. Conscientiousness is a little bit different from anything the Eysenck's had. It's, are you organized? Are you disciplined? Like, do you follow through on things? Agreeableness, are you kind? Are you soft-hearted? Are you helpful to people? Or do you tend to be in it just for yourself? Are you ruthless? Are you not willing to cooperate? The neuroticism, stability versus instability, is very similar to one of the Eysenck's dimensions. Openness, again, is a different one that is introduced in the Big Five, and that is this creativity. Are you imaginative? Do you like variety? Or are you more practical? Do you like routine? And then again, we have the extroversion introversion dimension. So this is regarded right now, this is the one that gets most used and referenced right now in psychology. So those are the various ways of characterizing personality traits, and I'm going to go back to the MMPI for just a moment. This is another test that's used, and the MMPI is used in a much more serious clinical manner than the other. The other ones might be used, to be helpful to somebody, or help them think about their personality and how they might want to change it, or what kinds of work might be satisfying to them. But the MMPI is actually what's used for identifying emotional disorders. And if you were tested on the MMPI, what they would be looking for would be, symptomatic things that perhaps would need to be treated. So, for example, if you look at this is a person before treatment and after treatment, and you can see that when it came to hypochondriosis, they scored relatively low, was in the normal range, but depression was in the clinically significant range. They have masculinity, femininity here as being perhaps in the clinically significant. Maybe this person has gender identity issues, and also some anxiety. But for example, with schizophrenia, they don't really show any critical symptoms of schizophrenia, nothing concerning with paranoia or hysteria. So they would be rated on these 10 different criteria to determine if there is a diagnosable issue that the person should be treated for. So that is the conclusion of our notes on the alternative theorists on personality.